Hi, this is music appreciation, early music appreciation video number 3 to help prepare you for your exam 3. Now we left off last time, we had been talking about concert overtures, right? And the difference between a concert overture and a symphonic poem. And now we are on to who composed the music for the ballets Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, and Sleeping Beauty. Now here's a clue. He was Russian, but he was not a Russian nationalist. He wasn't in that group of that Kuchka, the group of the Russian Five. He was another Russian, and his name is Tchaikovsky. You've got it. So the Russian romantic Tchaikovsky is famous for having composed the music to those 3 ballets, Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, and Sleeping Beauty. The next question. Romeo and Juliet is a blank, but the composer called it a blank. Well, Romeo and Juliet technically is a symphonic poem. However, the composer wanted something fancier to call it, and so he called it an overture fantasy. Now, just to remind you, a symphonic poem is a one-movement work. Oftentimes it's lengthy, it's pretty long, one-movement work for orchestra. Based on some kind of extra musical ideas, and obviously this is based on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. That's the extra musical idea that's used in this piece. It's also in a relatively free form. Remember, that's different than a concert overture. A concert overture is in sonata form. Okay, the next question is, what is characteristic of all nationalist music as discussed in class? Well, that characteristic is the use of folk music of each country. So, Russian nationalists used Russian folk music throughout their pieces. Spanish nationalists used Spanish folk music. Bohemian nationalists used Bohemian folk music. Scandinavian nationalists used Scandinavian folk music. That's the general characteristic that was shared by all of those nationalistic composers. The next question is, the rise of nationalism in music was a reflection of blank. It was a reflection of people cherishing their distinctive artistic heritages. They were really proud of where they came from, and it was a way of trumpeting those traits. Which countries produced romantic nationalistic music? Oh my gosh, I just listed them all previously, so now this is going to be a review. I talked about Russians. I talked about Bohemia. Oh, I didn't talk about England, but England is definitely a place where there were nationalistic composers composing in this time. Scandinavia and Spain. Now, some notable countries that are missing are Italy, France, and Germany. Now, don't get me wrong, Wagner had some nationalistic tendencies in his music, but not in the way that we've been talking about, the idea of going back to folk music. I know Wagner went to folk stories, but he did not necessarily use folk tunes. So you'll need to remember Russians, Bohemians, English, Scandinavians, and the Spanish are examples of romantic nationalist music. What characterizes the music of nationalist composers? Now, we already said a desire to bring out characteristics or traits that are common to their particular country and the use of folk music, but also they reflected a rebellion against the traditional harmony and form of European romantic composers. They were going against what had been done traditionally in Europe with composition, with that traditional harmony. They were going back to these folk ideas and basing harmony on harmonizing a lot of those folk melodies. Okay. Next question. The opera Carmen, written by the French composer Georges Bizet and set in Spain, is an example of what romantic trend? Okay, so it's about Carmen. It's written by a French composer, yet it's set in another country. It's set in Spain. That means it's not nationalism, it is exoticism. Okay? So, that's an example of exoticism, where you're borrowing ideas from other cultures. And a lot of the French were very good at writing Spanish music. They weren't Spanish, but they wrote Spanish music. And that's an example of exoticism. What does the term kuchka refer to? I just mentioned it earlier. That referred to the group of 5 composers, the Russian Five, or the Mighty Fistful, which was a close group of Russian nationalistic composers. They were working together. Only one of them was actually trained, but they were working together to create music that was clearly Russian in character by borrowing from folk tunes. What kind of a composer was Modest Mussorgsky? I'm not looking for, oh, he was good, or oh, he sucked. That's not what I'm looking for this question. I want you to know that he was a Russian nationalist. He was one of the Russian Five, or the Mighty Five, or the Russian Fistful, or the Kuchka. He was intensely nationalistic. Pictures at an exhibition is considered to be what type of music or genre? It's definitely program music. It's based on something outside of music. It's program music. It was originally written actually for piano, and it's a set of, you could call it a set of miniatures. It's like a song cycle, but it's not a song cycle. There's no singing. It's like a song cycle, and that's a collection of all these little ideas, or like character pieces. And they're based on, remember, an actual visit to an art gallery, looking at the paintings of a friend of his who had recently died. The extra musical idea, therefore, is painting. Smetana and Dvorak were nationalistic composers from what country? That is Bohemia, which would be the Czech Republic now, but at the time was Bohemia. Again, Smetana, Dvorak equals Bohemia. Ralph Vaughan Williams was a blank composer. The answer to that question is English nationalistic composer, an English nationalist. We didn't get a chance to listen to Ralph Vaughan Williams, which is sad because it's fantastic music. But he definitely wrote using English folk tunes and things in his pieces. Which late Romantic composers were not nationalists? Okay, let's think about this. Who was not a nationalist? Well, we already said that Tchaikovsky wasn't really a nationalist. Even though there's certain things that maybe seem Russian in his writing, he did not use Russian folk music. He was really conducting, or composing rather, in a very traditional European style. And it wasn't necessarily a Russian style. So, he was not Tchaikovsky was not a Russian nationalist, and also Brahms definitely wasn't a Russian, or wasn't a nationalist, period. Remember, Brahms went back to the classical style, the classic Viennese style. So, the good way to remember this is remember who were, and go about it the reverse way. Remember who were the nationalists. Well, Dvorak, Smetana, Grieg, Sibelius, Granados, Defaya, Ralph Vaughan Williams, those are all examples of course, Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov. Those are the 2 Russians that I wanted you to know from the Mighty Five. Those were nationalists, so anyone listed that's not in that list, that's going to be not a nationalist. Which important late Romantic composer responded to the unbridled emotionalism of Romanticism with a return to Viennese classicism? And that is the dear Johannes Brahms. So remember, Brahms was a traditionalist. He really went back to those old things. He didn't like the overabundance of these rich melodies. He still had beautiful melodies, don't get me wrong, but he had a much more refined style that was really looking back to the classical era, to the pre-Romantic era. Now remember, there were 2 late composers we talked about that reacted to Romanticism in different ways. Brahms went back, and there was another one, and that is Gustav Mahler, who responded to late Romanticism with a bittersweet nostalgia for lost innocence. I know, that's really dramatic, but kind of true. So he loved Romanticism, and he kind of pushed things a little bit farther, Gustav Mahler, and you can feel the sense of melancholy at the kind of the changes that are happening in the Romantic era. Which composer was Brahms's lifelong model? And the answer to that is Beethoven. Okay, now I'm going to stop here because I'm running out of time, but Beethoven was Brahms' lifelong model, which makes sense. Beethoven, remember, had 1 foot in the classical era, 1 foot in the Romantic era. He still is a true Romantic, but he was starting out in the classical era, so he has some classical aspects to his writing for sure. All right, that covers it, and we will move on with the remaining questions in video number 4 shortly.